Hello, in this video, I want to share with you the 5 biggest HMO mistakes in property investment and how to avoid the HMO property investing pitfalls. So my name's Simon Zutshi. I've been investing in property for over 25 years. I've had HMOs for 23 years. And I'm the author of Property Magic, the Amazon #1 property bestseller, and founder of the Property Investors Network, which is the largest organization of networking meetings around the UK. Now, back in 2003, I started teaching people about investing in property, and I didn't really have many HMOs. I only had one HMO. And it was after a couple of years, I was talking to people about different types of property, and I looked back over the last 10 years of my investing, and I realized that very first HMO I had, which was a student HMO, a small one, rented to 3 students at Birmingham University, I realized that was not only the most profitable property I had, but also it was actually the least hassle. Now, there are lots of different types of tenants you get in HMOs. Students just one type. I'll talk about those later in this video. But actually, the students would move in, they'd be there for a year, sometimes 2 years. Their mum and dad would pay the rent, so there were never any rent arrears. It was a good quality property, so very low maintenance, and it really was very, very low hassle. And I thought, why on earth am I not doing more of these? So in 2005, I started buying more properties, turned them into HMOs, and I realized actually it was such a great strategy. Now, it doesn't work for everybody. I wish it was the one and only strategy, but it's not. But it is a great strategy that you can use when you do it correctly. So what I want to do is go through these 5 biggest HMO mistakes in investment property to share them with you so you could avoid these mistakes and avoid the common HMO pitfalls and mistakes that many people make. So here's the very first mistake, and it's a bit of an obvious one really, but the first mistake is not actually getting involved in HMOs. And I think it's partly because people don't really understand them. There's lots of myths about HMOs. People get very confused. They think it's harder than it is. They think they have to do single lets first and then move on to HMOs. Or maybe they think they've got to manage the properties themselves. Now, all those points might be quite valid. You know, some people do start with single lets, then move on to HMOs. And whilst I see the benefit of doing that, because HMOs is a more advanced strategy, I also think, well, hang on a minute, you're getting such a small return from a single let compared to an HMO. Why not learn how to do it properly and start investing in HMOs? And if you don't want to manage properties yourself, that's fine. I don't manage my properties myself. I pay other people to do it for me because I want to have my time free to do things like this. I love training, teaching, and educating people. And if I spent my time managing my properties, it would be a full-time job. I don't want to do that. I get other people to do it for me. So the first big mistake is through a lack of understanding, lack of knowledge, thinking you can't do HMOs. And hopefully by the time you watch this video, I will demonstrate to you that actually you should definitely be considering HMOs as part of your portfolio. Now, just linking to that, the reason often people don't do HMOs is they think, well, I need to have lots of money to do it. And if you're going to buy a house and do a full refurb, yes, that does require lots of money. But first of all, it doesn't have to be your money. It could be a joint venture or it could be a private loan. But there are also strategies where you can benefit from HMO cash flow without actually owning the property. So you could do rent to rent HMO. You could do purchase lease option HMO. We don't own the property, but we've got the right to buy it in the future. So educating yourself and understanding just what's possible is the first mistake that people make because they just don't do it. The second big mistake people make when it comes to HMOs and property investing is they don't understand about licensing and planning. Now, this is quite a big topic. I've got a separate video completely about this, but let me just give you a little bit of an overview here because this is a big block to people moving forward. And I see people making expensive HMO mistakes because they don't understand it. So I want to help you with this right now. So first of all, you've got to understand that planning and licensing are totally separate. Very often people get the two mixed and confused. So let's talk about licensing first. So licensing is if you have a property with 5 or more unrelated tenants. So 5 or more unrelated tenants, you absolutely have to have a mandatory license. Now, it used to be the case if it was on 3 or more floors and 5 people. In 2018, they got rid of the floor requirement. So if you have 5 or more unrelated people living in a property, you absolutely need to get a license for that property. What does that mean? Well, you need to approach the local council. They'll have an application form probably on their website, or contact the HMO licensing department. You need to give a floor plan of the property. There are certain requirements. So for example, the rooms have to be a minimum size. So a single room has to be 6.51 square meters and a double room has to be at least 10.22 square meters. But, and this is very important, listen carefully, different councils have interpreted the rules and guidelines in a different way. So some councils might say, well, the minimum room size in a licensed HMO needs to be 10 square meters. So it's important for you to contact your local council, the HMO licensing department, and understand exactly what their requirements are, so you're completely clear on what needs a license and what doesn't need a license. For example, some councils say 3 or more people, they need to have a license. So check with your local council. Now let's just touch on planning briefly. And planning is important, but it's completely unrelated to licensing. You might get a property that needs a license or doesn't need a license, or one that needs planning or doesn't need planning, so they are different things. So the first thing to understand, if you have a bigger HMO, i.e. 7 or more tenants, that's not really seen as a normal property anymore. It's got its own planning class called sui generis. So if you have a property for 7 or more tenants, you need to have planning permission for sui generis. Now, if it's a smaller HMO, 6 or less people, in most parts of the country, you can take a normal house, which is a C3 planning classification, and you can turn it into a C4, which is an HMO, for up to 6 people, under what's called permitted development rights. You don't need to get planning permission. That is, as long as it's not an Article 4 area. Now, Article 4 is where the local council have removed the permitted development rights. That means in an Article 4 area where the council don't really want more HMOs, if you want to turn a normal house, a C3 planning, into a HMO C4, in an Article 4 area, you would need to apply for planning permission. Now, more likely than not, the planning permission is going to be rejected because they don't want more HMOs. But if it meets the criteria, in terms of a planning perspective, that's normally less than 20% within a certain radius of the property, you might still get planning permission on appeal. So don't think if it's an Article 4 area, you can't get HMO planning permission. You might be able to if it meets the criteria. The other thing about Article 4 is that people think, okay, well, if you buy an existing HMO from a landlord in an Article 4 area, they think it's automatic got planning. That's not the case. You would need to apply for what's called a certificate of lawfulness to show that that property has been used as an HMO before Article 4 came in and has been used continuously as an HMO. Then once you've got the certificate of lawfulness, then you can buy the property. If you don't have that, you need to get planning and there's a chance it could get refused. So it's really important when buying an HMO, you understand about licensing and planning, which are totally separate, because otherwise you can get yourself into a bit of a mess. So really important you get that. I do actually have another video all about explaining the difference between planning and licensing, goes into a bit more detail, but hopefully that's enough to get you thinking. The next biggest mistake people make with HMOs when it comes to property investing is not checking if there's enough supply in the area, supply and demand in the area. If you think about it, you're renting this property out, you've got to make sure there are enough people in the area who want that type of property. And it's important because in many areas there is an oversupply of HMOs. Let me say that very clearly, there is an oversupply of HMOs. But that kind of links to my next point, which is number 4, which is the next big mistake people make, is they have very average HMOs. Look, there is an oversupply, but most of them are very standard stock. What you should do is make sure that your HMOs are better than the average available on the market, ideally much better. And that means you'll be able to charge more rent for the property, and also you'll have less void periods, which is where you have no tenants. Now this is important because if you have an average HMO, you're competing with everyone else. What most landlords do is they just lower the price. And that's a mistake with HMO property because you might attract not such a good type of tenant to that property. There are always discerning tenants who will pay more rent if the property is good. So by making sure it looks good and it's very functional to use, you might have people who want to stay there for a long time because they got everything they need, they don't want to move out. And also it's going to minimize your churn of tenants. So really important to make sure you check the demand and supply in the area. You could do that online by going to websites like spareroom.co.uk. And number 4, making sure you don't have average HMOs. And then the 5th big mistake that people make with HMO property is they mix different types of tenant. Now there are 4 types of tenant you can get in an HMO property. The first type, and most people think this is what HMOs are all about, is students. So people who are studying at university, they've moved away from home, from mum and dad, they often live in a hall of residence or university flats for the first year. Second and third year, they often move into a house with some of their friends. So it is an HMO. And that's the main, probably the first type of HMO tenants. Now, there are some real benefits of that type of tenant because they often come as a group. They often sign one contract. So although technically they're an HMO, they're one jointly liable and severable contract. That means if one of their friends moves out, they all have to pay the rent. And very often mum and dad actually pay the rent for you, which is pretty good. The second type of tenant in an HMO is a young professional, someone who's been to university. They've got a good job as a doctor, an engineer, an accountant, a solicitor, whatever. They're earning a good salary. And actually they quite like the idea of living in a house with other people rather than living on their own, which is more expensive. And also, especially if you move to a city where you don't know people, it can be a bit lonely as well. So you get an instant social life doing that. Then the third type of tenant is just working people. They work in shops, factories, offices. They've got a job, they don't want to live with mum and dad anymore, they move out, they can make great tenants. And then the fourth type of tenant, which I don't have in my HMOs, but I do for my single lets, are people who are on benefits. They're receiving local housing authority benefits. In an HMO, there can be quite a lot of work. So what a lot of my students do is they pass those properties to charities. The charity does a rent to rent with them, so they get a really good rent, they have no hassle, got no management fees. Often the charity pays all the bills. It can work very, very well, but hard work if you do it on your own. Best to give it to a charity. So those are really a summary of the 5 biggest HMO mistakes in property investment. Number 1, not doing it in the first place, generally due to a lack of knowledge and understanding. Number 2, not understanding about supply and demand. Number 2, not understanding about licensing and planning to make sure you understand those. Number 3, not checking supply and demand in the area. Number 4, having very average HMOs, you're just competing with everyone else there. And number 5, mixing the tenant types. So it's no good having 4 young student nurses living in a house and putting some 45-year-old bloke who's just working down in some office. Might be great for the bloke to live with the nurses, not so good for the nurses really. So make sure you stick to one tenant type in each of your properties. You can have different properties with different tenants in different locations, because obviously students, they have to be very close to the university. Young professionals, they want good transport links, local facilities and amenities. If you're renting to people on benefits, not so important about the location. But obviously HMOs need to be done in an urban area, big town or city. It's not something you can do in the countryside. So I hope that really helps explain some of the myths about HMOs and help you avoid some of the big mistakes. If you found this useful, please hit the like button. Any questions, please put them below. And if you like this content, want to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so whenever a new video comes out, you're going to be notified about that as well. So I hope that helps, and I look forward to seeing and sharing with you on the next video. I do hope you've enjoyed watching this video. And look, if you want to learn more about houses of multiple occupation and how you can really profit using them, I've got some extra online training that I'd like to give you access to. So all you have to do is click in the link in the description below the video, and you can come and register and get access to that training, which will give you far more detail and really help you save a lot of time and make some real shortcuts to make sure you're getting the next HMO property much, much quicker. So click on the link right now and come and register for that extra bonus training with me. In the meantime, I've also lined up another video here I think you'll find really useful. So until the next video, remember to invest with knowledge, invest with skill.